Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I wanted to explore the SSFx Manual Backtester. This is a new product that I've been working on for quite some time, trying to get manual backtesting into MT5. So as some of you might have experienced, backtesting on either TradingView or on other platforms can get pretty expensive after some time, or rather if you actually try to use the platforms at any given level. So I will say that the user experience on those platforms is actually pretty great, but if you're trying to backtest on a budget, you might start looking at MT5 or MT4, but then these platforms don't tend to come with manual backtesting capabilities right off the bat. In addition to that, even if you get the strategy tester, that specific environment, you don't essentially end up with the ability to execute trades. You need an expert advisor to run in the background for you. So in this case, I actually went out of my way to try and build out a product that would allow you to essentially backtest. Before I actually jump into showcasing the product, what it's about, and how to use it on MT5, since it's MT5 only for the time being, there are certain steps I would recommend for anyone trying to use it to ensure that you have the best user experience possible while using the product. Just to start out, all you need to do is to go on any open chart. I want us to essentially prepare a template for testing purposes, so that whenever you're jumping in or trying to use the manual strategies tester, this is the approach you'll be using. So all you need to do is to go to an open chart on MT5, right click, go to the properties, and then I tend to prefer the color on white theme. You can choose whichever, but once you've selected your theme, on the common panel, depending on whether you prefer to use bar chart, candlesticks, or line charts, you can choose whichever you prefer. But the main setting that I'd recommend you to change is essentially adding the ask and bid lines and not showing the trade history. So at the moment, the trade history is being shown. I don't know if you can see it. The trade history is being shown on the chart, and this essentially tends to affect, or rather overlay, on the manual strategy tester. If you prefer to have them, you can still have them. It wouldn't prevent you from backtesting, but that's essentially it. Once done, as you can see, my chart looks all cleaned up. The history isn't showing, and something else I could do is to clear the objects list, but it's currently cleared. So once I'm done with that, all I need to do is to go to template, save template, and I'll save it as tester.tpl. This is how you need to save it. Tester, all lowercase, .tpl, and then you just save. In my case, I had it in place, so I had to replace it. But once you're done with that, let's now jump into the manual backtester and walk through the settings and how it works and all that. Having set up the template that you'll be using in the strategy tester, I'd like to drag on the expert advisor so that we can go through the inputs. So it doesn't have a lot of input. None of these settings can be changed once you've launched the expert advisor, since they essentially define how the expert advisor works by default. So for instance, when calculating the position, the calculate position based on, you can either calculate positions. This is when using risk mode. You can either calculate them based on the account equity or the account balance. So when working in percentage mode, let's say you're risking 1%. Once you've decided that you're risking 1% of the account equity, you will only ever be allowed to use account equity for that session. Next is the volume step in percent mode. So when working with percentages or percentage volumes, you'll actually see this when I've jumped into, or rather I'm actually using the expert advisor. Once I've jumped in, you will notice that if you've selected 0.01 in the percent mode, when you click on the plus icon or the minus icon, it will only add 0.01% to your value. The same applies to the volume lots mode. So when the volume step when in lots mode, so when working with lots instead of the percentages, you can only increase it by 0.01 or the value that you input here. to essentially improve your ability to backtest or your user experience, these values, I wouldn't recommend changing any of these two values, because at the end of the day, if you want to risk 0.01%, that's like the least value you'd want to risk on most accounts. So that's the recommended minimum for the step, or rather the step value. And the same applies for the price, but then if you tend to work in ticks mostly, or other points, I definitely recommend changing this from 10 to 1, so that whenever you're working with one tick, you're essentially working with just the one tick. In this case, it's just defaulting to 1 pip, or rather 10 ticks. In Forex, 1 pip tends to be equivalent to 10 ticks. Lastly, we have the default take profit points and stop loss points. Remember, these values are in points, not pips. So this in Forex, or rather Euro US dollar, it applies to 40 pips, and this one 20 pips. This is just the default. Of course, you can change the stop loss and take profit points, as you will later see while I'm demonstrating how the expert advisor works. Once you've set up your settings, you can just jump in and start the backtest. As you can see, if I click on OK here, the expert advisor will be mounted onto the chart. But remember, it essentially doesn't work on live markets, or rather live charts, since it isn't optimized. So while you can see the buttons changing, it doesn't imply that it will work. As you can see, you can't see any lines or anything. So as you can see, this won't essentially work. So in this case, I'll just remove it so that you can test it in the environment where it was built to work. So I'll be going to View, Strategy Tester, and I'll be selecting Visualize, since I actually want to perform a visual backtest of this using this expert advisor. So in this case, I'll just select the manual backtester. I'll select Euro US dollar. Actually, if you haven't created a custom symbol yet, I definitely recommend creating one. I'll quickly create mine, and import bars. But if you'd like to know how to actually do this, I definitely recommend watching the video that's linked in the description below, since it will essentially allow you to figure out why and how I'm doing this, so as to make things easier on your end. Once the data is imported, as you can see, my symbol is selected, and I'd just like to jump in so that I can walk you through the backtest. So as you can see, the inputs are the same, but in this case, I could change my price step to 1 tick to kind of make things a little bit more interesting, so that you can see what changes that will be happening based on these values. So in this case, if I'll be using percentage mode, I'll be calculating my volume based on the account equity. My volume will be changing by 0.01 if I click on the plus or minus button, and when in lots mode, it will be changing by 0.01 lots if I click the plus or minus button. When modifying or editing any of the prices, that includes the entry price, the stop loss, and the take profit, they will all be changing by 1 tick, not 1 pip, 1 tick. So let's just jump in. It's loading. If you can remember, we created a template initially, and as you can see, this is our template. As you can see, the chart was moving pretty fast, and this is the first feature related, or rather the first feature of this expert advisor, which is the ability to pause and continue from the UI itself. So as you can see, I just click on add trade, or continue. And one thing to note is that you cannot add any trade if the chart is not paused, because it essentially allows you to essentially stop things and process what's currently happening in the market and work with the lines and any of the objects without any distractions. So in this case, having paused the backtest, I'll just demonstrate a few of the options that are available to you in this case. So as you can see, if you can remember, our default take profit and stop loss were 20 pips and 40 pips respectively, or rather 40 pips take profit and 20 pips stop loss. So if you can also remember, we can modify. So that being said, let's actually walk through the options. So most of these buttons are actually toggles, or rather they are clickable. So if you click on them, something will happen depending on your current settings. I'd actually recommend that before you actually start backtesting using the tool itself, I'd recommend going through and trying to find out what each of the buttons is doing and trying it out for yourself to kind of build the muscle memory for working with the tool. So for starters, the first button I've just demonstrated is the continue backtest, or rather add trade button. If I click on it, the market either continues or pauses. With that out of the way, the next button is the buy button. This is actually a toggle that toggles between buy, sell, and cancel depending on the context. So when you click on sell, the stop loss goes to the top and the take profit goes to the bottom. Something else, for the cancel mode, that actually only ever occurs when you're trying to edit a trade or edit an order or edit a position. So positions in this case are just trades that are currently live in the market, while orders are just pending trades. In this case, I'll just move to the next button. So for the execute button, this button is used to essentially send in the trade. If you click on execute, it actually also sets the EA to unpause the chart and it continues to play. So clicking on execute essentially tells the EA I'm done with setting up my trade and I'm ready to continue. So that's essentially how it works. This essentially gives me an opportunity to jump into the last button, which is essentially view positions. Bearing in mind we have a position currently open, I can view it. And as you can see, when viewing the position, a table opens. In this case, I'll first close it so that we can continue with the backtest without essentially having that trade distracting us for the time being. The next button is the volume lot. This is actually a toggle. It toggles between volume lots mode or volume percentage mode. So if I click on it, I switch to volume percentage, which essentially allows me to set a percentage at this point, and this percentage will essentially dictate the amount, depending on whether I selected account equity or account balance, the amount, or rather the lots that will be traded in the next trade given the value that I set here. So if I wanted to risk 1%, I'll just set it to 1% and execute the trade. This trade will essentially calculate the stop loss and determine the lots that will be used for the trade. In certain cases, this might not actually be allowed, since without the stop loss, we can't essentially determine your volume. So if you don't have a stop loss, or rather the stop loss line is equivalent to the entry line, we can't essentially calculate the lots based on risk because we don't know where you're setting your risk at. So the EA will not allow you to do that. Otherwise, let's move to the next buttons. As you can see, all these buttons are either plus or minus, or plus X plus 10 times or minus 10 times. So remember the values that you set at the beginning or in the settings file. If you had set 0.01, percent as the step mode, if I click on this plus, as you can see, it added 0.01. If I click on minus, it subtracts 0.01. If I click on plus times 10, all these 10 times buttons are essentially utility buttons that allow you to multiply the value that you added as the step times 10, and then you add that. So in this case, if I wanted to do 0.01% times 10, which is 0.1%, I will add 0.1%. This is the same for all these values. Now, depending on the color, as you can see, they're color coded. For the price, or rather the entry price, it's actually changing by the value that you set, which was 1 tick. Check this out. So if I want to lower the price by 1 tick, it went to 0.95619. It was 0.95620. And then I can continue doing that by 1 tick. As you can see, it's barely moving. But then if I do the times 10, it's essentially moving by 1 pip. And I can essentially move the lines to where I want them. You might be asking yourself, why can't you just drag the lines? So this is actually a quirk in MT5. MT5 doesn't allow you to interact with lines as objects, or rather drag objects around in the strategy tester. So this is a fallback that essentially allows you to circumvent that feature, or rather that limitation, essentially allowing you to play around with the charts in these situations. So that's for the price. And then for the take profit, you can add it. As you can see, I'm adding it in as far as pips are concerned. So I'm adding 1 pip per time. And the value displayed here is in ticks, or other points. So don't confuse this for pips. So as you can see, 440, it's 44 pips. So I just added, I made sure that it's displayed in ticks for those who actually prefer working in ticks as opposed to points. And for anyone working with pips, you just need to, in most cases, or rather in Forex, in most situations, you just need to divide that value by 10, or removing the last value. Yeah, that's essentially how it works. You can add the take profit or reduce it. As you can see, this adding or subtracting does not mean that it will go higher or lower. It's actually referring to this value. So if you add to that value, it's 510 ticks, or rather 51 pips from the entry price. That's essentially how it works. The same applies to the stop loss. As you can see, I'm reducing the stop loss or increasing it. That's how it works. So with that out of the way, we have the next 2 buttons: cancel orders, close positions. So for cancel orders, it essentially, so let me just demonstrate this. If I click on execute, I've added a sell trade at that point. Here's the trade. I've just paused it so that you can see it. So here's the trade, the sell trade. At this specific point, as you can see, my view orders count has increased to 1. So I have 1 order that's currently pending. If I click on view, as you can see, 1 order, and I can close the table. So if I click on cancel orders, it will cancel that order, and I'll not have any order in the market. As you can see, once I clicked on it, nothing happened. But this is because the chart is currently paused. If I unpause it, the order is gone. So in most situations, if you perform an action and you don't see the result, just know that it has happened. You just need to unpause the chart. In this case, the next button is close positions, which does the same thing as cancel orders, but in this case for live trades or positions. Lastly, we have the view orders and view position buttons. These buttons essentially open tables that show you your pending positions and pending orders, allowing you to interact with them, either to modify them or cancel them, or rather close them out. Before I actually jump into that table, I wanted to walk through the blue buttons that I skipped intentionally before, because I wanted to essentially elaborate more on them, since the take profit and stop loss, for instance, the take profit and stop loss are actually toggles, while these buttons are also toggles, which essentially toggle whether you are tracking or not tracking the price. So to demonstrate, I'll increase this to this point. So as you can see, we are 15.2 pips away from the entry price. This is what that number actually implies. So if I leave this open, or rather the blue mark open, and click on continue, the market will continue. As you can see, we have barely moved. Let me actually speed it up a bit. We have moved a bit, and as you can see, the market is still at 15.2 pips away from the entry price. That's what this first blue button implies. So let's move to the take profit. So for the take profit, it essentially implies that we are tracking the current price at 40 pips. If I don't change this value and allow it to track it, it will always be 40 pips away from the price. But if I disable this and click on continue, as you can see, it's reduced to 30 pips because the take profit was locked at 0.946. So let me continue again. Remember this value, 0.946. As you can see, 0.946, 23 pips. Essentially, this button implies that the take profit price will always be at that point if I continue the backtest. The same applies to the stop loss. As you can see, when I click on it, it reset back to the default. But the same applies to the stop loss, which is essentially, at the moment, it's at 0.951. If I click on continue, stop loss is still there. But if I uncheck it, it goes back to the value it was before, which was 27 pips. Keep that in mind. So these buttons, you might find them useful, you might not find them useful, depending on how you trade. They essentially allow you to either place a trade at specific points and set the stop loss and take profit, and the entry is what will be moving. So if you wanted the take profit to always be at 0.946 regardless of where the market went, you will just allow your entry price to move, or rather this section to move, up until the point where you want to actually execute. And once you've executed the trade, you'll find that your take profit will still be there. This tends to be pretty useful, for instance, when you want your stop loss to always be above a certain level, but then and your take profit to always be targeting a specific level, and your entry price can be at any given point. Otherwise, if I click on the take profit, as you can see, the take profit line disappeared. As you can see, if I click on it, it's saying no TP, so it just removed that line, and now I cannot add a take profit to my trade. The same applies to the stop loss. I can remove them both, and that's essentially how it works. If you remove it, you essentially end up with no stop loss. So in the case of the stop loss, once you've removed it, you might notice that it's resetting to 0.0. So if you try to turn it back on and you notice that it's no longer there, you might notice that it's at 0.0. So you just need to set your stop loss. As you can see, this is a quirk that's there in the code, but if you think that it should not be resetting to 0, please comment down below and I'll be changing that in the next version. Otherwise, let me actually show you the trade management, but I'll start with the orders. So for me to add an order, I'll just be raising this a bit to make sure that it won't be triggered immediately, so that you can actually see it. So it's a sell order at the top, and it's risking 1% of my balance. If you want to actually see what that 1% means, you just click on the volume and it's 2.5 lots. It actually converts between the two, so you can see depending on your stop loss. So 1%, and I just execute, and I go to view orders. As you can see, if I click on view orders, it essentially pauses the chart so as to give you more time to actually process what's actually happening. So on this chart, I can see that the ID of the order is 7, which is corroborated at the bottom. The side is the sell. Volume is 2.5 lots. Entry, stop loss, take profit. And in this case, I can click on modify or cancel. For modify, at the moment when I click on it, as you can see, I get the lines directly on top of my values, and I can now move essentially where I can now essentially move the trade or its entry, take profit, or stop loss levels. So let me show you how that would work. Assuming I wanted a 10 pip stop loss and let's say a 50 pip take profit. This does not mean that you can only reduce the stop loss or increase the take profit, but you can actually do it both ways and even remove the stop loss completely by reducing it up to the point where the entry price is. But in this case, as you can see, now I have the cancel button. If I click on cancel, it cancels that execution and I'm essentially back to where the trade was. But if I now wanted to update it, I can, let's say, reduce this and reduce this. Good. When I click on update, the trade has been modified. Same case with clicking on this X button. It essentially cancels that trade, but if you remember, you will not see the change until you click on continue, and that order is essentially gone. Same applies to positions. In this case, let me add a buy trade here. I'll go to view positions. As you can see, I added the buy trade there, and I have a buy of 2.5 lots, and it's at the bottom too, currently sitting with a profit, sitting on a profit of $125. And if you can actually see this line on top here, this is actually what I was talking about when I mentioned that these lines, the history lines for the trades, will essentially could be bothersome if you actually start seeing them like this, but this is just a quirk on MT5. If you'd like to get rid of them, you just need to do the thing I mentioned regarding templates, essentially just prevent the chart from showing them. I'm not sure if you can change it live here. Actually, you can't. So I guess you're stuck with them. So in this case, I have the position there, and if I click on modify, same to the orders, I have the lines in place, and positions are actually special since I can trail the stop loss past the entry price. If you try to do that for orders, the stop loss, if it goes past the entry price, it is just reset to 0. Your stop loss becomes 0. Same applies to the take profit. But for positions, it's actually special in a way whereby if you click on, let's go to modify. I wanted the trade to go in our direction for a bit so as to perform the break-even stuff, or rather moving the stop loss past the entry point. If I click on modify and just modify the stop loss by reducing it, you'll notice something curious. So now we are perfectly at break even. We don't have any stop loss. But if I continue, now we have a stop loss that's in the negative, but then it implies that I'm securing profit. I'm securing 9 pips. Let me update that. And as you can see, I was taken out at break even, or rather 9 pips profit. That's essentially how it works. Those are the features related to the expert advisor, and some of the stuff I'd actually like to show you. The tables, as you can see, as you might have noticed, they seem a bit small, but that can be resolved by essentially having that can be resolved since we have pagination. I'm actually adding a bunch of orders onto the history so that I can actually demonstrate this. So I have quite a number of orders which are pretty small, but it seems like these are 6 orders or something. Let me add one more, and then I'll go to view positions. As you can see, now we have the pagination indicators. As you can see, I can go to the next page or the previous page and see all the orders that I have, and I can modify any number of these, close all of them, close any individual trade here, and that's essentially it. This is the manual backtester. You can use this to essentially trade. If there's a feature that you think is missing and you'd really like to have it, please comment down below and I'll be seeing how to add that. I'll also be adding links on how you can get this today or whenever. It's actually on the MQL5 marketplace, and if you'd actually want to get this, I'll be including a link to that. It's on the MQL5 marketplace, and you can essentially get it at any time, and there's a demo version there which you can of course use to make sure that this is the right product for you before you actually jump in. But the good thing is, even if you decide to buy this or purchase it, it's essentially a one-time purchase, and I'll be constantly updating it to make sure that if there are any new changes on MT5 or any new features, or you have additional features that you'd prefer on the product, I can of course be adding them over time, which will of course be good for you. So hope you check it out. I'd very much like to hear what you think about this. Whether you have any opinions, any recommendations that you'd prefer about it, please comment them down below or contact me directly via mail. But yeah, cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you like, subscribe, and share the video, and hope you have a great trading week and month ahead.